بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, my brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, and a good day to all of you joining us from different parts of the world. On behalf of Bahrain Institute of Banking and Finance and its partners, Hijaz, I warmly welcome you to the first event of 2025 as part of our Islamic Finance Talk Series. BIBF, for those who don't know, BIBF is the training arm of the Central Bank of Bahrain. As the premier provider of financial education and training in the region, we provide education in business and finance through degree programs, both undergrad and postgrad, professional qualification, as well as our own qualifications. We also offer short training programs ranging from 1 day, 2 day, and 3 days programs. I'll not go into detail of these. For those who are interested in some of the important programs that we offer in terms of training and education, you may want to visit our website, bibf.com, and you can navigate to the Islamic Finance page to look at the courses offered by the Islamic Finance Center at BIBF, which is one of the 6 centers at the institution. As I said, we are part of the Central Bank of Bahrain, being the training arm of the central bank. We play a very, very instrumental role in the development of human capital, not just in Bahrain or the region, but globally. My name is Dr. Rizwan Malik. I am the head of the Islamic Finance Center here. I'm very, very proud, and in particular, BIBF is proud to host this Islamic Finance Talk Series for discussing important issues and emerging topics within the global Islamic economics, banking, and finance landscape. The aim through these talks is to foster meaningful dialogue, facilitate the exchange of knowledge, and explore evolving landscape of the industry. As we embark on this journey, we hope to inspire innovation, promote best practices, and contribute to the sustainable development of the Islamic finance industry. Today's talk, which is the first for our 2025 monthly Islamic Finance Talk Series, is on tokenization and Islamic finance, which is a very, very important topic and has the potential to transform and innovate in this very important sector. Alhamdulillah, we had an overwhelming number of registrations for this virtual event, where we maxed out the capacity of 1,000 that is allowed by MS Teams. As a result, we actually made some of the people very unhappy. We had received a lot of requests for others who were very keen to attend. We apologize for the inconvenience this may have caused. However, the good news is that we will be publishing this. This session is being recorded, and it will be published on the. It will be later published on YouTube for everyone's reference. Some of the housekeeping rules. We have a lot to cover through this session. There is a Q&A tab. If you may want to use the Q&A tab to ask any questions, we will, if time permits, we may take questions. Given the overwhelming response and the number of people who are attending this program, it would be not possible to be fair. So there is a possibility that we are unable to take questions. However, if time permits, we may allow a few questions here and there, subject to the time availability. Now, today's talk on tokenization and Islamic finance is very important. We are going to cover what actually means by tokenization, what are the underlying technologies that are used for tokenization, what it means, how is it applied in practice. Theory is one thing, but how is it applied in practice? What Sharia has to say about tokenization? Is it in line with the Sharia, the Sharia parameters, or is it not? How do we go about looking at tokenization from an Islamic finance perspective? And we will also bring together the case study of how it is applied in practice. And then we'll dive into the challenges that any upcoming topic or new area has to offer. We are very, very blessed to have a subject matter expert with us, Mufti Faraz, who has kindly spared and spent a lot of time, in ensuring and in preparing for this presentation. So very, very honored to have Mufti Faraz Adam from the UK, who is a distinguished leader within the Islamic finance industry and has been playing an instrumental role in terms of advising banks and financial institutions for last 15 odd years. He's the CEO of Amanah Advisors, a leading Sharia advisory firm based in the UK, and he has made a significant contribution when it comes to the advancement of knowledge, in particular in Islamic finance and fintech space. Mufti Sahib has also is generally known for his very proactive research and advisory roles in emerging sectors, including Web3 initiatives, where he had played an instrumental role in bridging Islamic finance principles and applying it to the modern technological advancements. He's also written a book on Islamic fintech in 2019, which is also shaping the discourse on integration of Islamic finance within the digital economy. In 2023, he joined Fasset as a Sharia advisor, where he focuses on developing Sharia-compliant tokenization solutions, further demonstrating his commitment to innovation in the financial sector. Currently, he's also pursuing a PhD. He's a very, very dedicated leader within the Islamic finance space, and his effort in the PhD is to look at the Sharia governance framework and artificial intelligence. So developing a Sharia governance framework for artificial intelligence. Very, very instrumental. As I said, he has played a huge role in advancement of knowledge. And I am personally a fan of Mufti Faraz Adam when it comes to his knowledge, his passion for learning, advancement of knowledge, creating an impact, and among others, of course, his LinkedIn posts, which are very, very instrumental. And I personally enjoy and benefit from them quite a lot. So once again, we are very, very thankful to have a lot of attendees with us for this very important session. The session is being recorded and will be live, or the recording will be placed on YouTube later on, inshallah. And inshallah, we're looking forward to benefiting from the knowledge of Mufti Faraz Adam on this very, very important topic of tokenization and Islamic finance. So before any further ado, I have the pleasure of welcoming Mufti Faraz Adam to this important talk, and inshallah looking forward to benefiting from this. So over to you, Mufti Faraz.
جزاك الله خير. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. It's an honor and a privilege to be here with you all today. I'd just like to thank Dr. Rizwan for the very, very warm welcome and kind words. To be honest, it's not my doing, it's Allah's blessing upon me, and I've just been blessed with phenomenal leaders throughout my life. That's what the truth is. If you walk in the shadows of great people, some of that will rub off onto you, right? So wherever I go, I've always been blessed with amazing people. Even at Fasset right now, there's an amazing team, and Muhammad Rafi Hussein, which many people know, amazing visionary in the Web3 space. So that's really the secret behind everything. There's nothing else personally. But nevertheless, look, we have a very heavy topic today. I'll try to make it as easy as possible, as accessible as possible, and everybody can see my screen and my presentation, which says Tokenization Islamic Finance. So let's jump straight in. We're going to be speaking about what tokenization is, core technologies driving tokenization. We'll learn about token standards. What are they? Why are they important? Then we look at the obvious benefits of tokenization. What's the process? How does it all work really in the back end? What's happening? What's the ecosystem like? Who's who in this entire industry? The risks and challenges that come with tokenization, which must be addressed. And then, more importantly, from our perspective, the Sharia compliant issues. What are the things that we need to be aware of and we need to be concerned of when developing Sharia compliant tokenized platforms, assets, vehicles, or anything else? We'll look at some case studies, and then I just want to leave you with a picture of what Islamic finance can look like in the future. And that's really important, because if you don't have a vision of, let's say, 100 years, you won't know what to do now. And this is what the Islamic finance industry is missing. We are missing a 100-year vision. What should Islamic finance look like from 100 years from now? We should be able to articulate that very clearly and vividly. And that will then, we work from that backwards. Then we have milestones. So 90 years we need this, 80 years we need this, 50 years we need this. That's how you bring change over the long term. But if we don't have a roadmap or a destination or a vision, we can never see a future. And we're always stuck in the present or in the past. That's why that roadmap is a must for the entire global industry. But I think the main question is, why is this all important? Why are we talking about tokenization? What has Islamic finance got to do with it, or the Islamic economic system? And this is just, I just want to warm up the conversation here, which is that from an Islamic economic philosophy perspective, Islam guides us to a production-based economic model. It's a production-based, not a consumption-based. This is the fundamental difference that we have. We are here to give, not to take. That's why the narration in the hadith, which most of us have heard or at least have read, Al-yadul ulya khayru min al-yadi sufla. The hand, the upper hand, is better than the lower hand, meaning the one who gives is better than the one who receives, meaning to give to people, and that requires production, is far better than just consumption. There's added reward, there's benefit, but production based. That's the most important thing. Secondly, Islam, by its very nature, is a low time preference way of life. Islam is a low time preference. Islam encourages a tomorrow person. You're supposed to be building for tomorrow. You're supposed to have an eye on tomorrow and the hereafter, not just a today person and a high time preference person where you're just thinking about the here and now. So our entire mindset is different. That mindset cannot be detached from your financing and economic activity. The idea is, if it's an Islamic economic system, if it's an Islamic financial system, the Islamic philosophy and mindset must be embedded into the activities. So we are production based, not consumption. Riba, by its essence, is a consumption based system. Riba takes away. Riba is liability. Riba takes you to the minus. Islam is asset. It's positive. It adds. It's production, not negation or consumption. So the riba system works on consumption. That's the whole thing. So Islam is very different. It's completely polar. It's a polar opposite to the system that is, by and large, being practiced. And it's not in favor of anybody, Muslim or non-Muslim. It's not in favor of anybody. Islamic finance or the Islamic philosophy is not restricted just to Muslims. It's for everybody. It's a mercy to people. Secondly, what's most important is innovation and advancement is embedded into our framework and practice. That's why the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he told us that khairun nas anfa'uhum linnas, as mentioned in Tabrani, that the best of people are those who are most beneficial to people. Right. So being innovative, adding value to people, thinking of solutions, advancing, making things easier for people is the prophetic way. And that's within our model. Distribution and circulation of capital goods and services is again central to the Islamic message. And that's why there's multiple prohibitions on monopolizing or creating monopolies, cartels, intercepting supply chains, all these practices which artificially interfere without adding any real world value or any benefit and utility to the people. It's makruh and prohibited. That must be abstained from. So there must be a movement, a freedom of movement of goods, capitals, and services benefiting everybody. Leveling the playing field, another important idea within the system, which we'll understand all of this when we talk about tokenization, because a fundamental principle which underpins all Islamic financial contracts and exchanges is this idea in the Arabic language, which the classical scholars mention. It's called musawat in Arabic. Musawat. Musawat is this equal footing or like a level playing field, that all parties should have equal footing, be on a level playing field where there's no unfair advantage to one over the other. That's why so many conditions are prohibited, because it creates an unequal footing or an unfair advantage. And that opens the door to exploitation and other malpractices. So this is again embedded. We want to create a system, or we need systems which are naturally coded to provide this kind of level playing field. And then finally, we want and we should seek to develop platform systems, processes, environments which are most conducive. They have to be conducive to human welfare, exchanging their goods and services, having their needs fulfilled with the least amount of barriers. And we know that from the very first economic activity the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did when he arrived in Medina. Because after establishing the masjid in Medina, the next thing he did was he set up a market. And when he set up a market, when he surveyed the land, he established the market. He did so on the basis that no levies or tariffs will be charged to anybody that comes to this market. There was a removal of barriers because the markets in that environment at that time had many multiple barriers. So he comes to Medina and he just changes the entire landscape. And you have this kind of like tariff free market. Now, what happens as a consequence? Business, capital, goods, services, people come flocking to this one market. So, this is why it's so important. We need to adopt this thinking. And these are the, I would say, the impulses that will drive us to and stimulate us to think outside of the box to create solutions, not problems, more solutions we need. And so let's now talk about really then tokenization. What are we actually talking about? When you talk about tokenization, it's not just about meme coins or crypto. It's much more than that. So it's not a debate whether crypto is halal or haram. That's not the debate here. And really, I'm not frankly interested in that discussion now. It's a very old discussion. Let's focus on, okay, what are the potential benefits from technology that we can use to actually benefit mankind? And that's the discussion. So tokenization, if you were to kind of sum it up in a sentence, it'd be defined as the process of generating and recording a digital representation of traditional assets on a programmable platform. So it's just a representation of a real thing in a digital space. And what we're doing is we have these digital tokens, which are entries on a database, recorded digitally, of course, and those entries can contain information and functionality. Tokens can have within them, they can contain information and functionality. And that's where the actual innovation comes now, as we'll see. So tokenization is just simply that. As a simple understanding, it's simply a process of representing a digital thing on in a digital space. And one of the key drivers or the assets that we have in this space, we have real world assets and we have native assets and security tokens. What are real world assets? Real world assets are everything that tangibly exists in the real world. So your properties, your cars, your stocks, sukuk, art, all of these in this space, we term them as and deem them as real world assets. Why is that important? We need to demarcate and differentiate between what's the actual assets in the real world and what's native assets now. Native assets are those assets which are blockchain based assets. They're purely digital, these native assets, and they exist only on the blockchain network. And they can be transferred, they can be created on to different networks, they can be sent from person to person, they can be deployed at a network or smart contract level. There's multiple ways and things that you can do. So, for instance, you have Ethereum, you have Ether, ETH, which everybody has heard of. Ether is the native asset of the Ethereum protocol or blockchain. That's the idea. That's the native asset, and so it's made there. And it's or another example is you have USDC like Circle. It's a native asset to Ethereum, Algorand, Solana, Stellar, Tron, and other Polygon as well, because these platforms can mint these tokens as well. And so that is a native asset of all these protocols. So those are native assets, which are simply made on a blockchain. These assets are created. But then you have security tokens, which is what we are more interested in at the moment. Security tokens are those tokens which are actually a digital representation of financial instruments or securities in the real world. We're securitizing almost, but in this language, we're calling it tokenization and tokenizing securities or instruments in the real world and bringing them on chain. So they were off chain, we're bringing them on chain. And so security tokens will be what we'll be focusing on as we discuss further. And this is just a nice kind of schematic I found online of the process. And there's many more like diagrams I'll share with you. But just again to cement the idea in our mind, there's real world assets. We are creating tokens. We're minting tokens. Those tokens then are being exchanged and traded on a blockchain or digital space. That's the idea. But these tokens are connected and linked. And when we look at the Sharia compliance, we'll talk about this connection and link. It's a very important part of Sharia compliance that when we are linking and pairing tokens with real world assets, that pairing is as real. It's not synthetic, and neither are these considered two separate assets per se, because then there would be no difference between a derivative potentially and these tokens. So to evade infringing issues with derivatives, we need to make sure it's structured in the correct way, and we'll discuss this further in the Sharia compliant kind of section. This is an example of tokenization, and there are some real case studies which I'll share with you towards the end. But simply consider an office tower worth 10 million US dollars. This type of tower is usually only available to institutional investors with large amounts of capital. So the typical retail investor cannot even access this. The ticket size is too high for a retail investor. But with tokenization, what's the benefit? One of the potential benefits is you can split this into 100,000 tokens worth $100 each. And therefore, you now have the ability and you have access, or you've given provided access to individuals who cannot afford a just say $25,000 ticket size. They can come in at a smaller level, but still have a means of investing, generating wealth for themselves, and using their disposable income to their long-term advantage. So this is just one example of tokenization. And of course, in some jurisdictions, you can even um, issue these types of shares at a small level. So it is not the key kind of driver, but one of the benefits of fractional ownership. With that being said, what are then the core technologies which are driving tokenization? Because tokenization is composed of multiple things. To the entire process requires different technologies, different participants, and different things. So what are they? So the first or the key four ones are blockchain, which everybody almost has heard about and knows what they are. Smart contracts play a very important integral role. Tokens, of course, and oracles. These are really the four, you could say, underpinning technologies in an ecosystem which are helping tokenization manifest and materialize. Without these four, you potentially would not be able to tokenize. The tokenization would not be possible or practical. And we'll see each one why that's the case and the reasoning for each one. So what is blockchain? We all know it's this digital, it's a ledger, uh, for argument's sake, in a very simple terms, right? I've just put it there for you as something you can read on the screen, but it's just a ledger, a decentralized ledger. It comes in multiple sizes and forms and ways, permissionless, it can be closed, open. There's so many ways that you can have a blockchain, but the idea is you have this a ledger, but it's more than that. The thing is, we typically equate blockchain to just a ledger, like an Excel sheet, perhaps. It's that's not entirely accurate. And in the next slide, I'll tell you why. But just the thing that we know, blockchain equals ledger, that's only half of the story. There's something else which makes blockchain powerful, which excites blockchain enthusiasts. It's the second half, right, which we'll discuss. Smart contracts. Smart contracts we look at in detail, but again, it's this software programs that automatically execute. It's just lines of code, and we'll see examples of that. Security tokens, we've discussed this or touched upon it briefly. They are on-chain digital representations of ownership interests in off-chain assets. So on-chain means on blockchain. Off-chain means out of the blockchain in the real world. So when you have security tokens, these are on-chain assets representing off-chain real world assets. That's what's happening. And you have oracles. Oracles are these fancy terms which I'm sure many of you must have heard or read about here and there. Uh, Literally used for this like wise people. But oracles are in the DeFi space or the tokenization ecosystem. They are what connects the real world to the digital world. What connects the real world to smart contracts. These are like bridges. They're a bridge. That's what oracles are. They're a bridge which provide the wisdom and knowledge to smart contracts to be able to receive knowledge from the real world and then execute or do what they have to do, right? In the uh, ecosystem that we're talking about at the moment. Now, blockchain. So look, let's just polish our understanding of blockchain and just go up a level. As I mentioned, blockchain is not just about a ledger. In actual fact, what makes blockchain really exciting is, in addition to being a ledger, it's actually like a big virtual computer because every transaction carries data. And that data can be multiple things. You can have tokens being transacted, you can have smart contracts being executed. And all of that is data which contains code information. And then this code is like if you're talking about Ethereum in the EVM, it's a virtual machine environment. That code is evaluated and executed. So the idea of blockchain is not just being a ledger. That's just half the story. But the other half is it's actually programmable. It can execute code. It's a computer. There's computation taking place. And therefore, really, blockchain functions not only as a hard drive or storage space, but really also like a CPU. That's the difference. It's not just about saving data, but it can also run, execute code on there. Smart contracts which lie and live on this blockchain protocol. They are executing and they can do things. And then what's the power of that? Well, if you look at traditional computing is where you have software under hardware and human control. The software is always the subject, right? It's humans, hardware are managing this. But in blockchain, it's like the software is governing the hardware. It's the software governing people. It's the opposite. It's inverse. We've just flipped it. So now that's extremely powerful because you can now set software which actually governs the rules. It's no longer now in the hands of the people controlling the hardware or the software. It's now the software which has set the principles, how it was coded initially. Yes, of course, you can always potentially change it as majority vote whatsoever, but the idea is now the software itself has a say almost. It makes decisions based on what's been coded initially. And that's the real power and a difference in blockchain. It's this idea of having a hard drive plus a CPU in one. So this is one of the key technologies driving tokenization. The second one, or let's just one thing to mention up here, blockchain uh, comes with multiple things. It's the topic of blockchain is deep. There's multiple layers. Think of blockchain as a stack. Right? So you have layer 0, layer 1, 2, and 3. Each layer has different benefits and purposes. So your layer 1 is just your simple kind of like technological infrastructure, your internet and telecommunications. That's what your layer 1 is. Your layer 2 is the layer 1 is the blockchain itself. Layer 1 is the blockchain itself. This is where the blockchain sits. This is where the network of nodes operate. Things are being validated. This is where the actual ledgers that we spoke about. Examples include your Bitcoin, Ethereum, Polkadot. This is where the consensus mechanism is functioning, the layer 1. Layer 2 is on top of that. If you think of a stack, this layer 2 then functions to resolve issues in layer 1, typically scalability issues. Like there's a famous blockchain trilemma. And so layer 2s try to solve issues that arise with layer 1. So you have things like roll-ups, sidechains, state channels. What are roll-ups? Roll-ups are simply where aggregate multiple transactions are rolled up into a single transaction roll. And that scales, that reduces load, that enables a higher throughput. So roll-ups are there in layer 2 to help the activity of layer 1. Likewise, you have sidechains. Sidechains are independent blockchains running parallel to your layer 1 blockchain. Again, but it's helping, it's offloading. You are permitting transactions elsewhere, or you are supporting the functions of the layer 1. And then likewise, you have state channels. State channels are like, they're described as like these private roads almost, where users can transact off chain, do things off chain, and then settle on chain again, or kind of reconcile on chain. So that's layer 2. Layer 3 from a blockchain perspective is what you and I typically engage with or see or hear, where layer 3 is concerned with the applications that are created. So many of us have heard of decentralized applications. These are built typically on layer 3. So interfaces, wallets, and other things which enhance UI and UX, the user interface and user experience. You will be typically engaging with a layer 3 protocol. So your DeFi, your NFT marketplaces, your DAOs, all of this is happening on layer 3. So blockchain is like a building, it's a tech stack. You have your zero, ones, and twos and threes, and each one serves a role and purpose. Then, okay, tokens. Tokens are, I guess, something which is central to the entire discussion. But these are simply this asset, or they're not really tokens. Like when we think about tokens, what are they? Are they actual money? What's moving? Is there movement? It's actually data. It's actually data or ledger entries. That's what they are. They're ledger entries, and that's being wallets are being assigned to different entries. That's the reality of tokens. But these are then connected to, if it's a security token, they're connected to real world assets. You can, you know, if it's in Ethereum, for instance, you can code there. There's multiple things in depending which blockchain you're using, but it's a very versatile, I guess, piece of technology. You can do multiple things. It has multiple use cases and utilities, but it's not a physical thing that's being transferred per se. It's an entry on a blockchain which represents multiple things. So the value that comes in tokens is not for the line itself, the entry itself. It's what that entry represents. It's what that entry is being governed by, or what it gives access to. And that's really when people talk about, there's the age-old debate of whether Bitcoin or digital assets are Sharia compliant or not. Well, there are some analyses which are done which purely focus on the thing itself without thinking about the bigger picture and the utility that it opens up. That's really where the value is, because you use assets for the utility. That's the whole point. From a Sharia perspective, in Sharia, what is an asset? In Arabic, we call it mal. And the idea of mal is that it is embedded with utility. It provides services. And to be honest, the bar is so low to make something mal. It's so low. Like there's only few examples in the fiqh classically would say that this is something which is not mal. Anything which has benefit, you find benefit, it can become mal. And it's a very low bar, because the idea is assets from a Sharia perspective must have utility, and that's what is going back to our earlier discussion. When we talk about production based economy, whenever you're exchanging and trading, you have to provide an asset to a person which has utility within it, so they can either consume or produce. That's how the system works in this global economy where thousands of transactions are taking place. Sharia envisages a system where millions of transactions are taking place and everybody is giving something of value to take value. You can only exchange value. To take value, you have to give value. You can't give anything else. And giving value means giving something that has utility within itself. It opens up doors. You can use that thing or it gives you access to utility. So this is very important when looking at this entire discussion on tokens and what they are, and from a Sharia perspective as well, understanding the utility provision that's given in tokens. This is just another a schematic and diagram, which I found really beneficial, where you can see a difference between off-chain assets and on-chain assets. So off-chain, if you have securities, you'll have security tokens on-chain. If you have off-chain collectibles, you'll have security tokens, but in the form of NFTs. That's a different token standard. If you have off-chain currencies, you can have payment tokens on-chain. If you have cryptocurrencies, you'll have payment token cryptocurrencies. So you have stable coins for your fiat, but then you'll have like Bitcoin, for instance, a pure payment token when it comes to on-chain. So there's a clear contrast between off-chain assets and on-chain assets, but they are then pairing and working together. What's the value proposition of digital assets? This is something you can read, and everybody's probably read. There's so much written. It broadens the capital sources, as asset fractionalization. There's reduction of transaction costs, faster settlement, less risk, reduction of operational costs. These are all the benefits that digital assets tokens give, and it opens up multiple efficiencies. Something which is well known, and we've read about this online, and everybody who's interested in digital assets or tokens will have read about the potential benefits and value proposition. But I guess smart contracts is something then the next kind of technology. So first we discussed blockchain, then we talked about tokens as a second technology. Now it's smart contracts, which is at the heart of what's happening. And what is a smart contract then? It's a program, it's software, it's a collection of code. For instance, you'll see, I've got an example. This is Solidity. It's a programming language. So when somebody's making a smart contract, you can see where it says Pragma Solidity, that's the version, the contract. That's where you are coding the actual smart contract. And then you can compile it, you can choose the language, your virtual environment where you'll be deploying. And then if you're putting on the main net, you can go through MetaMask, so on and so forth. But Solidity is a programming language. This is what a smart contract looks like. So this is what's actually happening in the back end, the technical stuff, which you and I typically will never see. You just interact with the interface without knowing what's going on. But this is where it's all hardwired and coded. So a smart contract then is this code that's happening, and you can do multiple things in there. You can code like it works on a logic of if then. So if X happens, then Y. If this happens, then this, right? That's the whole idea of smart contracts. They can have balances, and they're a type of Ethereum account. They have a balance and can be the target of transactions. So when you are transacting with a smart contract, you're sending something to it. It's deemed as a transaction, but that's how you engage with a smart contract. Um, Smart contracts can define rules like a regular contract and automatically enforce them via the code. Smart contracts cannot be deleted by default, and interactions with them are irreversible. So this is the core of uh, where tokenization is occurring, or the kind of like the central place, because when you are issuing tokens, you're using smart contracts to issue tokens. So this is where it all starts. It's just this code. It allows you then to issue tokens and do whatever you need to do when you're tokenizing. But that's what's happening in the back end. What's a typical life cycle of a smart contract then? So you write your code in Solidity, for instance. You code. You compile. This ensures that the contract compiles without errors. It's compliant. There's no errors in the code. So then when you click compile in Solidity, which is a programming language, it'll ensure that it'll do a check and ensure that there are no errors. You can test it. It's not necessary, but you can test if you want to see any vulnerabilities. You can choose a deployment environment, whether you want to do it in JavaScript or you want to put it on a test net or a main net. So that's just where you're going to deploy the smart contract. You can configure and deploy, as I mentioned up here, use MetaMask and pay gas fees. The more code, typically, the more things involved in a smart contract, the more gas fees. These are the fees that you pay. So if you're using Ethereum, you have to pay Ether as fees to deploy the smart contract. And so that's how Ether is used for the deployment of smart contracts. You can verify your smart contract if you go on Etherscan. You can check it, make sure it's there, which you will be from Block Explorer, and then you can interact and engage with it. So in different ways, you can engage with that smart contract, and then that happen. And then that's when your smart contract is live. So this is actually the sequence of a smart contract. What's happening in the back end when you're making a smart contract? It's always good if somebody's interested in this. Just go on Solidity. You can even watch videos on YouTube on how to use Solidity. That's the beauty of knowledge. If a person truly wants to learn today, knowledge is democratized and accessible across the world now. You can read, you can see how Solidity works, you can watch videos, tutorials, and there's just so much available online. Then oracles. What are oracles? They play a foundational role, as I mentioned earlier, in this connection. They are what connects the off-chain and on-chain world. You need something in between, and that's the role of oracles. And there's much to be said about this, but these slides will be available so you can read in your own time all of this information. But the idea is you need something in between to connect off-chain and on-chain. So oracles plug that gap in essence. So that's everything to do with the technology. So there were four technologies we discussed: blockchain, tokens, smart contracts, and oracles. But now, when we are trying to tokenize, there's so many different token standards. And what are token standards? Token standards are a set of technical specifications that a token must follow on a blockchain. It's just a set of rules. That's what it is. Blockchains will only allow certain types of tokens to, to operate on a blockchain. If you don't have that type of token, you can't issue that token on this blockchain. So token standards are there with rules. That's what they're about. They cover a wide range of functionalities, including how tokens are transferred, how they are approved, how the data is accessed, and how they interact. That's the point. So for instance, um, we have the famous ERC20 standard, which is perhaps one of the most well known on the Ethereum network. Very, very well known and used. Many tokens which are made are using the ERC20 standard, and the most widely used. So they create fungible tokens. Each token is really the same as the other. Then you have non-fungible tokens. ERC721 is a token standard that allows you, it has the code within it to allow a specific type of asset being created. You have ERC115, you have ERC1400, and ERC3643. The last one is what we are going to focus on because that's the one, or the last two really, is where today's tokenization, they are using typically these two standards. And I'll tell you why. So tokenization today is really using ERC3643 or ERC1400 as token standards. So these are just like the rule books. If you want to issue a token, which rule book do you adopt? So it's these last two rule books that are being adopted for actual real tokenization that's taking place in the world today. And so why these two? Because these two, they are designed and coded to enforce compliance rules and control transfers to eligible investors. Because when you're securitizing, you have to consider regulatory approval, AML, KYC, your anti-money laundering, your KYC checks. All of these things are required for any firm or company which is issuing tokens and they have a license from the regulator. They have to comply with the regulator's requirements for safety and for good governance. So these standards have built within them the ability to comply with jurisdictions. So for instance, the ERC3643 protocol, it's an open source suite of smart contracts, enables the issuance, management, and transfer of permission tokens. It's built in a decentralized identity framework called on-chain ID, ensures only users meeting predefined conditions can become token holders, even on permissionless blockchains. So all the compliance requirements are met in this. Whereas your ERC20 that we spoke about, whilst it's brilliant, whilst it's amazing, it's you can use it very easily. The problem is it doesn't allow for the enforcement of transfer rules and compliance and regulation as far as capital markets are concerned. That's the problem with the ERC20 token standard. So there's limitations in terms of regulatory compliance. However, when you have these tokens now, your ERC 3643 has integrated compliance mechanisms. It helps facilitate compliance with your KYC AML, as well as specific regulatory requirements. It has automated on-chain validator systems, which we spoke about, and that allows and ensures that only eligible investors can engage. So that's why these token standards are really, really important when it comes to creating tokenized assets. It happens with these standards in particular. This is just another diagram, I think, from Chainlink, where they are also active in this space. How you have these tokens, the ERC 3643 token standard being used. So these tokens then the standard being used to issue these types of tokens. You have your primary market where issuers come, they're allocated. Then you have your secondary market where investors can trade on an exchange, a decentralized exchange, and continue trading. But the idea is your ERC 3643 is the token standard being used for tokenized assets today. So that's really like some of the technical stuff. Just to set the stage in your mind that, look, this is what's happening in the back end. You have smart contracts, you have tokens, you have token standards that we need to consider. We have oracles at play, all the key elements. Because when we talk about the Sharia compliance, we'll be able to piece these things together. Because we can't jump to Sharia compliance if we don't understand the areas of concern or things we need to think about. And so, what are some of the simple benefits of tokenization? Well, if we were to wrap them in three, there's three benefits: efficiency, liquidity, and decentralization of ownership. Efficiency, this is really what Baraka is. If you look at the explanation, it says improves performance using the least amount of inputs to achieve the highest amount of output. That is literally a definition of what baraka in our tradition means, right? قلة الأسباب وكثرة المنافع. That is baraka. قلة الأسباب وكثرة المنافع. And this is what it's saying. So efficiency is baraka. If you want to describe baraka to somebody, it's efficiency is the word. Allah creates efficiency. That's one of the manifestations of baraka. Of course, it has many multiple meanings as well. Liquidity, a benefit of tokenization, quick and easy trading, transacting without significant impact on the price, as well as decentralization of ownership. So you're distributing control and ownership of assets, which is powerful. When you make somebody an owner of something, that's powerful. That's where power comes with ownership. That's why, from a zakat perspective, why is tamlik required? Even in sales, you can't suspend ownership. That's why one of the reasons for gambling being prohibited in Sharia is ownership is being suspended, it's contingent upon something. Ownership empowers. That's Sharia wants people to be owners. That gives them the ability to grow, generate wealth, have, and then focus on what really matters. If you don't own assets, you're always chasing. You're always, submitted. That's why the dua of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was what? Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min ghalabati ad-dain wa qahri rijal. He would say, "Oh Allah, protect me, and I seek your refuge from unmanageable, overpowering debt and being succumbed to and being under people overpowering me." Because there's a connection between these two. There's a connection between people and debt overpowering a person. So, how do we combat that, or how do we evade that, and how do we free ourselves? How do we emancipate ourselves from these things? Is ownership. Because debt is a liability. You don't own, you owe. Even in the ribawi system, it's all about you owing others. Whereas in a Sharia system, it's about empowering individuals with actual ownership, and that comes with having assets. So that's one of the key drivers, and that's why the narrative of tokenization has many parallels with the Sharia philosophy. As you can see, there are many parallels that you can see in the Islamic economic mindset that's there with the tokenization wave that we are currently riding. Just some other benefits. You have your traditional process where you have large ticket sizes. Tokenization allows fractional ownership. Traditional is lack of optionality. Tokenization, open access. Low levels of liquidity. Think of your traditional assets. Some are really illiquid assets, whereas tokenization allows real-time trading. Traditional, high costs and fees. Disintermediation in tokenization allows a reduction of fees and reduced settlement times. These are just some more simple benefits, which we all know. Democratization, increased liquidity, global access, improved transparency and security, cost efficiency, and faster transactions. These are written everywhere, and it's available for you to. And any presentation that you see or anything you read on tokenization, these are the typical benefits that are there. And some of them might be there, some of them might not be there. It just depends. In reality, it's not as simple and straightforward as is mentioned always. But now this is the key part. What's actually the process of tokenization? How does it work, under the hood? What's actually happening in tokenization? What's the step by step? So this is a really nice diagram by Deloitte, which just shows you one thing, and I have more diagrams, but you have the real world asset. You are what they call digital twinning. You are pairing it with a native token. See, now these terms now make sense to you. That's why it's important we spoke about those initial kind of like intro, because what we discuss now, it kind of makes sense to you. We understand what a native asset is now. So we'll pair and twin a native asset with a real world asset. And then what do we do thereafter? It comes on chain. And once it's on chain, you can sell, you can do settlements, custody, transaction, conversion exercise. So these assets then become digitized. They're represented by these tokens. Whilst they sit in the real world, their ownership interests and benefits are on chain. And that unlocks the benefits which we just discussed previously. But this is a real process. Asset selection. The first thing is selecting an asset. So you have to find your asset. What is it that you want to tokenize? Is it property? Is it gold? Because today in the world, you have tokenized gold. You have tokenized real estate. You have tokenized sukuk. You have tokenized shares. So you can tokenize financial instruments. You can tokenize brick and mortar. You can tokenize almost anything. Anything in the real world can be tokenized. That's the first thing. Understand the asset you want to tokenize. Then the second part is where the challenge comes, the legal structuring. There are, why is that important? Because the claims to the real world asset is what we are concerned with. Who has a claim to the real world asset? What's the connection between the investor who owns a token to the actual property on Wall Street, for instance, or anywhere in the world for that matter? What's the connection between these two? And that's where the legal structuring is necessary. So there's two common structures or ways that, or two paths which have been explored and are currently being used in the industry. You have tokenized, what we call tokenized SPVs. So as everybody knows, we'll use an SPV where the SPV takes ownership of the asset. So the asset is held by an entity, private limited company or a trust. The entity is then tokenized. So it's the entity, there's tokens issued on, instead of like issuing shares per se, you are now having tokens issued, which represents the ownership of the underlying. And you'll have, for legal purposes, you'll have like a nominee or a trustee holding the asset on trust, but the beneficial ownership now being given to the token holders or token owners. So as far as as far as company's house or legal requirements concerned, the trustee or the legal owner will be there as a nominee on behalf of the investors who actually invest on chain and own the underlying asset. That's one way, which is the most common way. Today in the world, this is the most common way where you're actually using uh, legal persons and vehicles to capture real world assets and then to tokenize them. Instead of issuing shares against them, multiple shares, you're then issuing tokens on chain with a nominee playing a kind of like a trustee role. The other route is your direct asset tokenization, which is not really that common because it opens up multiple compliance and regulatory issues where you just issue tokens directly against the asset. Whereas in the first one, you're actually tokenizing the SPV, which then owns the asset. So as an investor or shareholder or a token holder, you have now a beneficial interest in the underlying through a legally recognized mechanism. But directly tokenizing an asset can have multiple issues, and it's less common due to the regulatory issues and lack of clarity and other things that can. Because what's the reckon? How are these tokens recognized in law? Whereas in a limited company is recognized, the nomineeship is recognized, the trusteeship is recognized. But if you are now having these tokens, different tokens being used, what's their legal recognition? That's the problem. So that's number two when it comes to legal structuring. Number three is custody, because in almost all cases, the asset itself will be with a custodian. So there'll be qualified custodians, there'll be trustees or licensed managers who will be keeping the asset safe on behalf of all these investors wherever they are in the world. So you have to plan for custody of an asset. So that's as far as the asset is concerned. Then, of course, as far as you as an investor is concerned, there's also custody discussions, whether it's self custody, whether you own your private keys or have access to your own wallets, it's your own wallets, cold storage, or whatever type of self custody that you're doing, or you're using a licensed digital asset custodian as your kind of like a typical exchange, for instance, where you're using their services and them as your custodians. That's also a possibility. Thereafter, token minting. Once you've identified the asset, we've set up the legal structure, we've thought about the custodian, it's now time to actually issue tokens. So we need to then, this is where the token standard comes in. Which token standard will you use? Will you use the security token standards which we spoke about earlier, or are you going to use something else? What is the asset? Is it a fungible, non-fungible, or what's going on? That's where we select the right token standard and issue the appropriate token. Um, and that's where you can think about the governing requirements, asset requirements, jurisdiction, tax, regulatory issues, and then you use the appropriate token. Again, as I said, most of the time we just use one or two token standards for tokenization. And then the blockchain protocol for issuance. So once you've selected the token, you now need to think about where will this token be interoperable and where will it be uh, traded, or where can you actually use it. So there are multiple platforms for your token as your infrastructure. You can have, for instance, Ethereum, you can have like Binance Smart Chain, you can have Tron, Solana, Polygon. These are different blockchain platforms that can be used for launching new tokens. And then once you've selected that, that's where now your assets, your native assets or your security tokens will be um, used, exchanged, and held. Now, what determines why you choose one over the other? Then it's speed, cost, compatibility, security, scalability, the typical reasons for choosing a particular protocol. So that's what you think of next after you've minted or you have these tokens. You need to think about, okay, where will these tokens actually be? And then finally, trading. Once you've done all of this, you are welcome to then trade in the secondary market. You're either trading peer-to-peer trades on licensed exchanges, decentralized exchanges. It's all up to you then. But that's the tokenization process. This is from Ernst& Young, EY, a brilliant kind of like diagram that just gives you an overview of what we just mentioned actually. So you have up here, look, the issuer of the asset. They're the ones who hold the real world asset. Here's your SPV. You have your tokenization provider. Because right now, tokenization, the way it works is almost like a plug and play. You have multiple third party providers. Because when we look at the actual ecosystem, there are so many elements in tokenization that you need to leverage the services of different parties to bring an entire tokenization product to market. It's not as simple as a click of three buttons at the moment, just because there's so many things happening. So you have your tokenization provider, your SPV, your KYC, AML checks. What's happening at the moment is typically something called whitelisting. So currently we do whitelisting, which is regulated, approved providers who are complying with securities law and regulations. They are the ones issuing tokens. So that's where they do the KYC, AML checks. And then the actual security token holder is then benefiting downstream. But there's certain approved users which are really like the gateways to securities, then real world assets. That's how you can think of whitelisting. You have these gatekeepers at this moment, because why are they the gatekeepers? Because they are the ones who have the licenses to do that. Hence, they are the gatekeepers. Then once it goes through them, that token then can go on any blockchain protocol or wherever, and can be traded. It can be traded on these like DeFi platforms, centralized exchanges. It's open. But that's a nice kind of summary of this. Likewise, this is just another diagram I just put in, just a very simplified, nice. You have the issuer, the asset goes into a smart contract, because remember, the smart contract is actually where the tokens are minted. It's a smart contract which controls tokens and the minting of tokens, the burning of tokens. It's all happening in the code of the smart contract. And then the investor receives the actual tokens. Tokeny is a platform, definitely worth checking it out. They have developed, and people are using now Tokeny as the kind of like one of the go-to tokenization platforms, because they are asset agnostic, jurisdiction agnostic, and multi-chain. So it's like an all-in-one package. They've encoded within. They're also using ERC 3643 as a token standard, which we discussed earlier. So if they're using that standard, they've already considered and compliance, regulation, everything in their entire customer journey. So as you can see in this diagram, you have investors, they qualified. Your KYC check is done, subscription is done, issuance is done, servicing in secondary market. So the entire journey is there from a compliance and regulatory perspective, very sound and very thorough. This is just some information again from EY, from Ernst and Young, of why people, what motivates people, and which assets are being tokenized. So you have your public funds, private funds, real estate funds, securities, private equity. These are like the common assets that are being considered for tokenization purposes. But what's motivating people and companies to go into tokenization? The number one is access to investors and new capital. That's the number one driver. Then you have increased liquidity, operational efficiencies, cost saving, ability to offer fractionalized ownership, so on and so forth. So it's a nice bit of data there just to give us a world view on what's actually happening and why people are being motivated for tokenization. Similarly, lower transactions costs, increased liquidity are the main drivers for investors to switch to tokenization. However, uncertainty in regulatory environment holds them back. This is one of the hurdles that most people have. What's the regulatory treatment of this? What license do we need? How do we comply with the law when we are issuing or when we're tokenizing? These are the real challenges. And hence, then, what's the actual ecosystem? What's this tokenization ecosystem, which we've been referencing and referring to through our discussion? So again, Token, you have provided these wonderful sets of information. You have multiple parties in this global ecosystem. You have custodians and wallets. You have DeFi platforms, distributors, blockchain networks and protocols, data ecosystem, tokenization platforms. All of these are relevant. They're all important, because your distributors, what are they doing? They ensure efficient issuance, distribution of traditional tokenized assets. That's what they're doing. And these are some examples and some companies which are playing a role in that space. So they're the ones distributing tokenized assets. DeFi, what are they doing? They're the ones who are offering the peer-to-peer trading and transacting platforms. Again, for instance, Fasset is the Sharia compliant one. But there's many companies, but these are some of the known companies out there. Custodians and wallets. As we discussed earlier, you need custodians and wallets for custodians for these real world assets. They safeguard and manage the actual physical assets, and they're the trusted entity. Wallets are your digital key holders. That's what they are. They allow you to securely store, manage, and interact with tokens and decentralized applications. So they are also very important in the entire ecosystem. Your platforms, multiple platforms of tokenization, they are what provide you the actual infrastructure to tokenize these solutions. So Tokenies one, for instance, which is a very good one, very well-known platform, which allows people to tokenize real-world assets, giving you simply the kind of infrastructure to do everything on one kind of platform and database. Your data and ecosystem. These are like almost as part of like your oracles and your real world kind of information that's being fed. So you got Chainlink, Moody's, Morningstar, what's currently used anyway in the financial industry, the typical companies that we see that provide and aggregate data for investors and issuers. Blockchain networks and protocols, they serve as a secure and transparent backbone of this transformative ecosystem. They're fundamental rule sets governing decentralized and secure operation of blockchain networks. What are some of the risks and challenges? So we've understood all of this, but what are the actual risks and challenges? Deloitte has highlighted a number of risks with tokenization. Number one, which is on everybody's mind, regulatory requirements. Because it's a fast developing um, ecosystem and the regulation is being implemented in stages and phases as there's more information coming to light. Therefore, regulatory requirement is one. AML KYC is a risk. How do we apply this to different client types and investors? Performance of what's happening, the assets there. Um, Resiliency, cybersecurity, governance, key management, protocol updates and forks. These are all some of the risks because you can have somebody who, for instance, does a protocol update maliciously and it has a majority vote, for instance, and he can change the entire protocol. Or there's a fork that's created, like has happened in other digital assets. So these are risks that are on the minds of people involved in tokenization. Cybersecurity, of course, a very common one, which we all have heard of and know of. What about the legal challenges? So there are some legal challenges. For instance, you have regulatory uncertainty, we talked about, jurisdictional conflicts. What if something is recognized in one country but not in another country, or you are trading elsewhere cross border? How will that country see this particular asset? Compliance issues, your AML and KYC. How do we confirm a token holder's identity? Because if you don't get that right, and you are a licensed broker or licensed dealer or an exchange, that is something which the regulator will be consider. Security and privacy concerns. How do we ensure that breaches don't occur? What systems do we have in place? What kind of like protocols and controls do we have in place to minimize this risk? These are some legal challenges that need to be thought of. Similarly, regulatory challenges. What's a token? How do we understand tokens from a regulatory perspective? Are they securities? Does securities laws apply to tokens? Are they utilities? Are they commodities? And therefore, then considering that is a tax implication because there's a different tax treatment for securities, commodities on trade or depending what's happening, but there could be a different tax treatment on different asset classes. Now, what's the tax implication on those assets? How do we tax these things? What should be the implications for international transactions? Ownership rights. Who owns what and how and why? cross-border transactions, consumer protection. How do we protect people? So these are all goals as well as question marks in the minds of regulators when dealing with tokenization and tokenized platforms. And that gives an entire introduction to tokenization. And now comes like the Sharia discussion. Yeah, it took almost 1 hour to get here, but we would not understand this had we not understood that 1 hour. So the Sharia stuff is important, and I guess this is like the heart of the discussion. But to understand the Sharia discussion, we had to understand all of that. So what's actually happening right now in tokenization and is in Islamic finance? What's actually happening in Islamic finance? So first of all, we don't have many players, to be honest, in the tokenization space. There are a few, there are a good number, but it's not as well developed, of course, as the non-Sharia kind of space, which is booming. And that's why it's important we have researchers, experts. It's we need to put our minds to it. We have to think. We have to push ourselves. We have to put pressure on our minds to really unlock, understand, unearth what's going on. And if there's value, let's build that value. If there's no value, let's trash that thing. But we have to push ourselves. And that's what we need today. We need builders, people who are just focused, dedicated just to building product solutions for people in Islamic finance. And therefore, in Islamic finance today, from a tokenization perspective, the same token standards are being used. We're using the same industry standards. So you're using ERC 3643, for instance, as a for tokenization purposes, or we're going through these whitelisting companies that we discussed earlier. So pretty much everything is the same as that is concerned. Your Sharia compliance right now is being managed off chain. It's not being managed on chain, and we'll discuss that right now. You have existing products. So from a Islamic finance perspective, your existing sukuk, your existing Sharia compliant ETFs or stocks or Sharia compliant real estate products are being tokenized and being offered. That's what's happening. But we need to see if we can innovate new products. Are there new things that we can think about? Are there new ideas? Because this is a blank canvas for us. We can innovate, we can try, we can think, we can push ourselves. So right now we're using existing products which already exist in the market. What are we doing though? Where's the actual benefit? This is something which the co-founder of Fasset always highlights, and have full admiration for him and respect. An amazing individual, Muhammad Rafi, who talks about the benefits, and he mentions one thing which has always stayed in my mind since I heard it, that for the developed markets, tokenization or tokens and digital assets might be a luxury, but for emerging markets, it's a necessity. The challenges that people face in emerging markets are a completely different set of challenges to those of the developed markets. So tokenization actually helps emerging markets gain access to Sharia compliant assets. And Muhammad Rafi always gives this one kind of like example. He gives an example of a person he knew personally in for instance, Pakistan or another country, where they are using an iPhone. They use an iPhone, yet they can't own Apple stock easily. They don't have access to own Apple stock. And this, through tokenization, these things become possible. You can now democratize access to investment grade, high yielding assets, whereas previously that could not happen. So right now, where the actual change is happening and where tokenization is really um, empowering Islamic finance is in the distribution of Sharia compliant assets, which are already accessible, available in some parts of the world, where tokenization is allowing others to also access this. This is really one of the key highlights at the moment in the industry. But what are the actual issues from a Sharia compliance perspective? These are just whilst I've been with Fasset for now 2-3 years, we've been building like a Sharia token standards in-house and continuously testing, trying different things and thinking of different problems and solutions. And so if we were to look at the pain points that we have from a Sharia compliance perspective, is these areas that we typically consider at Facet, and we always try to make sure from a Sharia compliance perspective that these are ticked off. So the first one is, of course, your real world asset. That's like anything and everything normal in Islamic finance. If you're investing in real estate, you're doing a business screening, a financial screening, ensuring the asset is a Sharia compliant activity, its business activity is fine. Or you can't be tokenizing alcohol, for instance. A very simple example, but the asset must be Sharia compliant in of itself. It can't be a non-compliant asset class. An obvious one. This is all happening off chain. Number two, off chain Sharia screening. I told you about the financial screening that happens. The number three at the bottom on the left is extremely important. Your on-chain and off-chain pairing. Your on-chain off-chain pairing. This is where there's a huge Sharia risk, which is that your token, it just can't be a derivative of a real world asset, because that can happen. There'll be no difference to trading options or swaps or any other derivative or futures if your token doesn't represent at all the actual real world asset. Rather, it's just simply pegged to it or deriving its value. Then it won't be a tokenization of that real world asset. It'll simply be a derivative of that real world asset. So if you are thinking of creating real world assets and tokenizing real world assets, you have to make sure that the real world asset is being owned, even though through beneficial ownership, beneficial interest, and through nominees in between, getting the right legal structures that we have in place. But it's ultimately the investor who owns the underlying asset. Whichever ownership that's legally recognized from a Sharia perspective works, that needs to happen. But what you can't and what you should not do is have an asset and then claim that this asset is actually tokenization of this this token is a tokenization of a real world asset where the actual investor has no ownership interest at all. That's not really tokenization then. You just created a stable coin perhaps. That's what's happened there. But it's not tokenization. So this is a very important, the pairing and the integration there is extremely important. Oracle overview, as we mentioned, Oracles provide this like off-chain, on-chain connection. You have to make sure that's proper. It's just a compliance check. No, there's not many like concerns, but just that the agreements, information, all of this complies with Sharia principles, but just part of the checklist. Your DeFi platform protocols, again, very important. Things like yield farming, liquidity provision, is it being done on an interest lending basis? This needs to be reviewed if you are trading these types of assets. Trading rules and staking yields. If you have tokenized assets and then you're trading them or you're staking them, for instance, what's the kind of like process there? Is it working in a Sharia compliant way or not? And then finally, your smart contract logic and code. You can't have anything in your contract or the smart contract logic which infringes Sharia principles. For instance, when the payments are released, rebates in certain contracts like murabaha, coding a rebate in a murabaha, transfer of ownership. When does that take place? Is it contingent? Is it suspended to something completely extrinsic or external to the transaction? All these questions are raised here. Is there late penalties, payments charged if payments are not made on time? That can be coded in a smart contract. Is riba being coded into the smart contract? Riba payments. That's an obvious one. But these things are problematic, of course. And so all the Sharia principles, as far as trading, owning, transacting are concerned, and any variables from a Sharia perspective, which must be considered for individual contracts. So whether you're doing a mudaraba, a murabaha, an ijara, and you are coding that logic in a smart contract, the specifications and particulars of those contracts must be reflected in the smart contract logic, or at least the key things. It must be in, if that is what is determining ownership transfer. If that's your key, that your smart contract is where is a nexus of everything, you have to make sure that smart contract logic is sound and doesn't infringe and doesn't violate or even defy what's happening in off chain. There has to be congruence and coherence between on chain and off chain then. The question then arises, okay, what about okay, we've talked about all these standards, but why not just create a Sharia standard then, a token standard? We've talked about ERC20 and ERC3643 and all these things. What if we created a token standard which is coded with Sharia? It's coded like you can't move away from Sharia principles. What would it look like? It'd be possible. It'd look like an extension of your ERC20, really, but with additional governing rules, compliance checks, and restricted transfer logic. But what's the challenge? The more code that you have, the more checks there are, there's more an increase of gas fees. That's the first thing. It can become expensive deploying these smart contracts and interacting with these contracts. Likewise, DeFi protocols, they like standardization. If you have a token standard not recognized, you can't then use that token on multiple blockchains. It's not interoperable. And a heavily customized token could face compatibility issues. Think about errors that can come. So it's compiling the token itself, complying that security token. It's not straightforward, and it's not very practical. That's why practically what happens in the real world today, the tokens that are being used are the same standard token standards, your ERC 3643 or ERC 20 standards, but your Sharia compliance is handled off chain. So your smart contracts are minimal anyway. The code is very minimal, talking about balance and transfers and these things, nothing more than that. But your legal agreements requiring token holders to adhere to, your blacklist for non-compliant addresses or activities, your Sharia audits and Sharia checks, your Sharia compliance with actual agreements, capital flow, cash flow, all of that's happening off chain. And so you are using your on chain for distribution, but your core Sharia governance is still happening off chain. And this is the most kind of like you could see the practical and current version of tokenization in Islamic finance, where we're just using tokenization for distribution and capital, but rather the kind of heavy Sharia compliance is happening as always happens off chain in the real world. Now some case studies. Now we're coming towards the end. I know it's been a long session with multiple like terminologies, but it's this kind of it's a webinar which perhaps you have to watch 3 times to really grasp everything. And I apologize for that, but it's just the nature of all of this. It is technical, but we're trying to make it as accessible and digestible as possible. The first case study is Fasset. So what is Fasset? Fasset is based in the UAE, headquartered in the UAE, with offices in Indonesia, in Malaysia, in Pakistan, and other parts of the world. But Fasset is this financial super app doing phenomenal work, and I've been working with Fasset for a number of years now, really at the forefront of Sharia compliant tokenization. They offer digital assets, crypto, stocks, bundles, tokenized ETFs, tokenized stock. So they are deploying and have access to tokenized stock, ETFs, and funds on their platform Sukuk as well. And how does this all work then? So from a Facet perspective, there's an order off chain. There's obviously the order initiation that takes place, the order execution. Once the execution takes place, the clearing is done, fulfillment is done, then you have your on-chain activity where your tokens are minted. So this is where you have direct one-to-one asset backing relationship with the actual underlying asset. So that is where your tokens are minted. Thereafter, you're using smart contracts to manage in terms of like ownership, in terms of transfers, in terms of burning tokens. If the tokens are repurchased, for instance, you burn the token. So all of that is happening on chain. So we're using an off chain and on chain integration, making sure that what is on chain represents what is off chain from a Sharia compliance perspective. This is just a few of our kind of like activities. Fasta is also we're exploring remittance and multiple other financial services because it's not just about tokenization, it's an entire ecosystem of financial services. Al Mabruk is another platform by my very beloved and respected brother and friend Fahd Siddiqui, a lovely, lovely gentleman located in Canada. So they launched Al Mabruk, which is a Sharia compliant real estate tokenization platform. They built it on the Polygon blockchain, obviously a layer 2 on Ethereum. But what is this? Al Mabruk is where it's a pilot of where they are tokenizing Canadian real estate, and investors can now invest through tokens and gain a beneficial ownership interest in the actual Canadian real estate. Those who know about Canada and its real estate prices is very, very expensive in Canada, real estate. So they are making access to Canadian real estate accessible through tokenization. Fusang, which has its licenses in Level 1, uh, launched the first tokenized sukuk, okay, or at least have a licensed tokenized sukuk issued, where what are they doing? They have developed this idea of a FDR, which is known as a Fusang Depository Receipt, similar to your kind of ADRs and HDRs that exist. But they are using this to wrap the underlying sukuk in digital form. They comply. They have their own Sharia board complying with IOFI standards as their Sharia standard, but then they are using these tokens that they've created as a means of trading the underlying sukuk allocation that's been given to them. And so investors have beneficial interest in the underlying through owning this FDR receipt that they have. So this is another very interesting experiment in the uh, Sharia world of tokenization. And just to finish off with this final few minutes, and it's brilliant on timing, right? The timing has been excellent, I guess. Um, what is the future of Islamic finance? And this is where, really we've been thinking, especially at Fasset as well, a conversation which we always have continuously is what is the future? Why should we be thinking about all of this? What are the benefits, or what should we be thinking about? So if we look at Islamic finance, at Fasset we typically say the tokenization world or Web3 is really Islamic finance 3.0 because Islamic finance has gone through different phases. You've had your 1.0, which was your 1960s to your 1990s, where it was all about product existence. We had to simply find an alternative to the riba system. That was your 1.0, a phenomenal job. Hats off, all respect to the pioneers there who did everything to give us a riba alternative. They set the foundation. Then came your 2.0. It was okay, fine, we have riba alternatives now. We have a murabah as opposed to a riba-based loan. We have ijara financing. We have this, that, and the other. We have musharaka mudaraba, and they can be actualized. However, we need more products, and hence from the 2000s really and onwards, or even earlier, just earlier than 2000, just your late 1990s or early 1990s, you start this movement of product differentiation. Sukuk comes in, takaful comes in, and different market participants and economic needs are now being addressed with product differentiation in this period. And now comes Islamic Finance 3.0, which is what is we believe is a present time where it's not just about differentiation now, it's actually about product penetration and innovation. Because whilst Islamic finance, the legacy Islamic finance based system exists, Islamic finance in the world today is restricted or limited to those who have access to financial services, who are banked, who have the ability or the environment or the top-down approval, or who have the infrastructure. What about those places who don't have infrastructure and people are interested in accessing Sharia compliant financial services? This is where this phase of Islamic finance really outshines and stands out, in that by leveraging the tokenization or the Web3 ecosystem, we can now distribute cross border, democratize access to financial services. And not only is it about distribution, really there's an ability for innovation. And that's why my final slide is this, that when we're building a Facet, this is one of our internal kind of like slides and internal ideas that really drives us. That when we're building Islamic Finance 3.0, we are energized with value preserving assets. That's what we want to do in a Sharia powered, not a Sharia compliant, a Sharia powered. What does Sharia powered mean? This is actually a term which I take credit for and I coined in my book Prophetic Finance and Economics, where I see Islamic finance in three different levels. You have the level 1, level 2, and level 3. Level 1 is your like permissible Islamic finance, which gives you structured products as alternatives to riba. That's your level 1. To go one up than that is your level 2, which is your equitable Islamic finance, where musharaka functions like a musharaka where parties are evenly now sharing things or costs are being split from an equitable perspective. Your level 3 is the highest, which is your prophetic finance, where institutions are now empowering customers. Institutions are actually paying for customers, as opposed to customers always paying for additional costs. The institutions have so much reserves and funds and profits, they're happy to take on some costs, helping people, or having a interest-free lending product available, for instance. So this is your prophetic level, where it's about giving and not always receiving. I call it the Sharia powered level, because that actually stems from the prophetic way, the prophetic guidance. And so if we want a Sharia powered system, we have to think in those terms. Now, what are the six core, I would say, drivers of Islamic Finance 3.0? Or the six core ideas? Number one is using long-term stores of value. So at Fasset, we're using long-term stores of value for people to engage in this new system, as opposed to inflationary assets. We want people to have intergenerational wealth, to preserve their wealth over the long term. Not that they had 100,000 in terms of purchasing power today, but that purchasing power has just dropped to 50,000 tomorrow. The entire life's effort and sweat and labor has diminished in front of their eyes. How can they ever free themselves? How can they ever grow themselves? And how can they become wealthy over the long term? So number one is using long-term stores of value. Number two is democratized. We want to provide Islamic finance products and services to those who are financially excluded, to the unbanked, helping where help is required and needed. That is the vision of Islamic finance or the Islamic economic system. Giving the hand to the one who's down and lifting them up. Number three, Sharia power, which I spoke about, trying to see which prophetic practices can we bring into finance? Because finance is a transaction, but it's also an interaction. Finance is a transaction, but it's also an interaction. Your interaction should be coded with a prophetic way. So we need to bring the prophetic way into our trading, transacting. That's why it's missing today. Although the contract is compliant, but how are you treating your customer? How are you behaving? Where is your kind of leniency, or what ideas do you have? How are you adding value to them? Really important. Number four is multi-product platform. We want to fulfill the needs of diverse people, and therefore we need a platform which can have multiple products, multiple markets. It's not just restricted to one market, but globally. And finally, multiple needs, as I mentioned. There's different economic participants and customers and users who have different needs. How can we build products which cater for everybody's needs? So this is a journey, it's a mission, and I'm sure there are multiple other wonderful companies out there doing the same thing, working to build a. We need more company. We need more people. We need more thinkers. We need more platforms, more companies, more visionaries to actually build this together. One team, one company can't build this. We need an ecosystem. So whoever's listening, whoever's watching, you have a role to play. That's the truth. The future is it's a blank canvas. You can build from the ground up here. You have an opportunity, take the opportunity, and we work together. It's not just for this. There's so much work to be done. If a person lived his entire life trying to build this, he will not be. He can't do it on his own. So we need everybody doing this together and thinking of innovative ways to really up the game and benefit mankind, because everyone, Muslims and non-Muslims, are in need of better products and services and need to be empowered. I end with this. Thank you very much, Jazakallah khair. It was an honor and a pleasure to be with you all today, and hand over to the host, Dr. Rizwan.
Thank you very much, Mufti Faraz. I think this was a wonderful crash course on tokenization and Islamic finance. I think you've covered what we would need in a couple of days to cover. You try and cover it in an hour and a half. But thank you very much for all the hard work that has gone in preparing for this presentation. You're certainly right. We'll have to watch a few times for us to fully comprehend, the underlying technology that goes into, building the network that it is. But we've got, by the way, we had a great attendance, alhamdulillah, and I think people have a lot of questions on the topic itself. Unfortunately, time is not on our side, and we have already gone past 5 minutes over the time. And given the number of people who are here and the number of questions that we have received, if we allow one and we don't allow the rest, I think it will be a bit unfair with the rest. So what I request, and if Mufti Sahib agrees, what I request is if you send us your questions, some of them are very, very interesting. I've been going through some of these questions. They are very interesting. If you send us these questions on the email address that is provided, islamicfinance@bibf.com, we will pass it on to Mufti Faraz for his response on that question. So I think that could be a way around it. I know Mufti Faraz is pressed for time, but I'm personally very, very thankful for him to spare his a lot of time for this very wonderful talk. As promised, the session has been recorded, so we will be placing it on BIBF's YouTube channel. So please feel free to access it later on, or in fact pass it on to others who may find it beneficial, inshallah. In the interest of time, I have to call it a day. Faraz, Adam, I'm really, really thankful for you spending your time. I'm very, very, honored to have you be part of this Islamic Finance Talk series by BIBF, the first one for 2025, and inshallah, we hope that we'll have you for some of the future ones as well, including zakah, for example, and some of the others. Maybe we need another session just on this topic itself to answer some of the queries that we have. Inshallah, during the year, we plan to host one topic every month. So it's a monthly virtual series that we have, embarked ourselves upon. So inshallah, please look forward to the next one. This has been very beneficial. I am also very, very thankful for all those who have stayed back for this session. I hope you've enjoyed and benefited from it. And with that, I would like to thank you all once again for your participation. And from our side, we look forward to seeing you in the future, inshallah, and look after yourselves and have a blessed time and stay safe. Thank you very much, and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.